And Mr. Strolla?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, bring the jurors on in. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. You can all have a seat. I see bright, smiling faces, so I'm sure that yesterday was a good day. I mentioned to everybody here it was nice that the sun actually came out and we saw some sun for a while. So hopefully you had a good, restful day, and now we're ready to resume. And the state will call their next witness.
Thank you, Judge. Sukhan Warf, please.
All right, ma'am, if you'll come right up here to the front for me, please. And if you'll raise your right hand, the clerk will administer the oath to you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, ma'am, if you'll come right around this way and have a seat in the witness chair. And you can adjust that microphone as you need, and just be sure to speak directly into it and loudly so we can all hear you, all right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Guy?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, ma'am. If you'd please tell the members of the jury your name.
Good morning. My name is Sukhan Warf. That's spelled S-U-K-H-A-N, Warf, W-A-R-F.
And where are you employed?
I work for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We have a laboratory here in Jacksonville, and I work in the biology section of that laboratory.
All right, and that's known as FDLE as well?
Yes,
How long have you been working for FDLE?
for 11 years.
And what are your duties and responsibilities in the biology DNA section?
I work, well, in the biology section, we take in items of evidence and screen them for their potential for the DNA testing process. So I look for body fluids, and I examine items to see if there are potential sources for touch or wearer DNA. And then I also perform the DNA testing on those items.
And how long have you worked in the biology section?
I've worked in the biology section since I've been employed at FDLE for 11 years.
What is forensic serology?
Forensic serology is the study of bodily fluids as it pertains to forensic cases.
All right, you mentioned that you conduct DNA testing. What specific type of DNA testing do you conduct?
The type of DNA testing we perform at the laboratory here in Jacksonville is called short tandem repeat, or STR DNA testing. It's DNA testing that is targeting DNA that is in the nucleus or the center of cells.
And how long have you been conducting STR DNA analysis?
I've been doing that for 8 years.
Give the jury an idea of your educational background, please.
I attended the University of North Florida here in Jacksonville. I got a bachelor's degree in biology, and then I also went on to obtain from the University of Florida a Master of Science in Forensic DNA and Serology.
Have you also received training within FDLE to perform your duties as a forensic serologist?
Yes, I have.
Can you just go ahead and describe that training if you would?
FDLE has a very in-depth training program in which I will do initially an academic study of the test and processes that I will be later performing, and I will do testing samples. So I'll run samples, and at the end of that period there is an oral board examination, and then there is a period of supervised casework. So I'm working actual casework under somebody else's supervision for a period of time until I'm released to do cases on my own.
All right, have you ever been qualified in the courts of the state of Florida as an expert in the fields of forensic serology and serology with an expertise in STR DNA testing?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
I've testified approximately 40 times in Northeast Florida.
Judge, I would at this time tender Ms. Warf as an expert in the field of forensic serology with an expertise in STR DNA testing.
Mr. Strolla? Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Warf is declared to be an expert in the field of forensic serology, and her testimony is like any other witness with one exception, and that is the law permits an expert witness to give his, or in this case her, opinion. However, an expert's opinion is reliable only when given on a subject about which you believe he or she is actually an expert. Like any other witness, you may believe or disbelieve all or any part of an expert's testimony. That's one of the instructions I'll give you at the close of the case, that you can believe or disbelieve all or any part of any witness's testimony. You're the judge, so to speak, of what the facts of the case are. So she's declared to be an expert in this field. Mr. Guy?
Thank you, sir. Ms. Warf, what is DNA and how can it be used in a forensic setting?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's found within the cells of your bodies. Now DNA, everybody's DNA is unique with the exception of identical twins. It is the building blocks of who we are. It makes us who we are. Now most of our DNA between individuals is the same because that's what makes us human. So the DNA that I'm interested in is the DNA that is different, that makes us individuals, that makes us unique. Because that's what's important in the forensic setting, because the purpose of the DNA in the forensic setting is for identification.
And what is commonly referred to now as touch DNA? What does that mean?
Well, DNA can come from anything a person has had contact with. So the term touch DNA is just anything somebody may have touched versus getting DNA from a biological fluid.
And can you explain how DNA is transferred from a person to an object to create what is known as touch DNA?
Sure. The DNA is found in most of the cells of our bodies. It's found in the skin cells that is on our hands. So if we touch an item or come in contact with our skin to an item, it has the potential to leave behind DNA from those skin cells.
All right, and you said potential, and that's kind of my follow-up question. Just because a person touches a surface or an object, does it mean that they will leave their DNA behind?
No, touch DNA often doesn't leave much DNA behind. That's why we screen things for biological fluids, because they are good sources of DNA. So touch DNA may leave DNA behind, but it doesn't always.
All right. If you had a surface that you wanted to test for touch DNA, how would you do that? How would it be collected?
A swab would be taken, which resembles a Q-tip kind of cotton swab, will be rubbed on the item, and then when I do my analysis, I will take a cutting from that swab to do the testing on.
All right. Have you had an opportunity to examine some evidence in the case of the state of Florida versus Michael Dunn, FDLE number 2012-406-772?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Warf, let me hand you what's been marked as States 197 and ask you to examine the packaging as well as the contents of that exhibit. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This was an item that was received from the laboratory that was described to be a swab from 9mm casings.
And was that exhibit sealed when you received it?
Yes, it was.
And is that important?
Yes, it is.
Why is that important?
Well, it's very important to maintain the integrity of the evidence. So the item being sealed initially is very important. It's important that we maintain a chain of custody where this item was at all points in time to maintain the quality and integrity of the evidence itself.
All right. Did you examine that exhibit for the presence of DNA?
Yes, I did.
All right. How did you do that?
Well, there was a swab, so I took a cutting from the swab, and then I subjected it to the DNA testing process.
All right. Can you kind of open that up and pull out the swab and just kind of show the jurors what you're talking about and where you've marked on that exhibit? I think one end is already open.
Thank you. This was the inner container that was inside of the outer manila envelope that I received. So inside this is a swab. It looks a lot like a Q-tip that I took the cutting from for the DNA testing process.
All right. And what did you find when you examined that swab for the presence of DNA?
Well, I did the DNA testing process on it, and my results were I did not obtain any detectable DNA on this.
All right. Does that mean that that casing, whatever the swab was taken from, was never touched by human hands?
No, that's not what it means. it could be what that means, but it could also mean that there just wasn't enough DNA for me to detect. Getting no results on a casing is a common occurrence.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Your Honor, that's all I have.
Mr. Stroller.
Yes, Your Honor. Let me please report. Microphone, Judge. Ms. Warf, how are you doing this morning?
Well,
Now, you said you're an expert in the DNA serology, is that correct?
the DNA, the STR DNA testing and DNA serology, yes.
What we call forensic serology.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what you've been qualified as an expert before?
Forensic serology and DNA testing.
Okay, and no forensic serology was done in this case, correct?
That's correct, because it was a touch sample, and it had already been swabbed as well. There was no serology or screening test done on this.
Right, and no bodily fluids were ever presented for you to test?
That's correct.
Okay, just shell casings?
That's right.
Okay, and you said it's not uncommon for it not to have touch DNA on it, correct?
That's correct.
And even though you did short tandem testing, your office can do Y short tandem, but that wouldn't have applied to this case either, correct?
This sample was, it did not meet the criteria to go forward with Y STR DNA testing, Y being a male-specific DNA test.
Okay, and there are other DNA testings that could have been done, but either your office doesn't do it or it wouldn't even be relevant to this case. Is that accurate?
There are other DNA testing in existence. For example, there's mitochondrial DNA, which tests DNA from mitochondria of cells, which is a different part of the cell. But that would not be appropriate for this sample either.
Okay. And again, you said you have a master's, is that correct?
I do?
Okay, no PhD, no doctorate, nothing like that yet?
No,
Okay, and you're not a technical leader in your lab?
I am not.
You're just an analyst, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And, excuse me, they gave you a lot more samples. The sheriff's office had sent into you a lot more samples to be tested for DNA in this case, isn't that true?
Yes, that's right.
And you made the professional judgment to not test them, isn't that accurate?
That's right. There were 3 more items that were received in the biology section that I did not test.
And that was shell casings recovered from the suspect vehicle, a top of the magazine touch from the suspect vehicle, and then live rounds that were in the magazine in the suspect vehicle. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you didn't test those because it's kind of obvious. If it's in someone's vehicle, it's probably going to have their DNA on it.
It's not that it's probably going to have their DNA on it, but even if it did have their DNA on it, it was represented as coming from the suspect's vehicle. And our purpose at the lab is to tie people together or to tie them to a scene. So something in a person's own possession doesn't seem to help.
And do you recall getting a phone call from Detective Musser asking you why you didn't test anything from the suspect's vehicle?
Well, it was kind of compound, so it is sustained.
Let me ask you this. At some point, did somebody reach out to you from the sheriff's office to ask you about your findings?
Yes,
Okay. And based on that conversation, did you kind of explain to that person just what you did now? It's not relevant because it came from inside the vehicle.
yes, I did.
Okay. Nothing further, Judge. Thank you, Ms. Worth.
May she be excused? Mr. Stroller?
So excuse, Judge. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. You're excused.